The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Ironclad fell silent whenever Rachel Raven Montgomery walked through the door. At 26, she stood barely 5'3" in her combat boots. Her auburn hair always pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it gave her headaches. Her uniform was immaculate, her equipment spotless, her posture textbook perfect. But none of that mattered to Charlie Company. To them, she was the soldier who couldn't hold a rifle steady when it counted, the washout who had no business being anywhere near a sniper's scope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rachel grabbed a tray and moved through the serving line, her movements deliberate and controlled. The whispers followed her like shadows, just loud enough for her to hear, but quiet enough for the speakers to claim innocence if confronted. "That's Montgomery," someone muttered behind her. "The one with the nervous breakdown at sniper school. Hands shake so bad she couldn't hit the broadside of a barn." Another voice chimed in. Heard she dropped her weapon during the final exam. Just froze up completely. They say she cried for 2 hours straight. She found her usual table in the far corner, the same isolated spot she'd claimed every day for the past 2.5 years. As she ate her bland military rations in silence, Rachel's mind wandered to the elite sniper command school, where her dreams had died in a single, devastating moment that no one truly understood. The memory was always there, lurking just beneath the surface like a splinter she couldn't remove. The final evaluation at ESCS had been going perfectly until everything went wrong. She had been lying prone on the 800-meter range, her breathing controlled, her sight picture perfect. 5 shots, 5 hits, all within the kill zone. Then came the simulated artillery strike, a massive explosion designed to test a sniper's ability to maintain composure under extreme stress. The blast had been closer than intended, a training accident that threw her violently against a concrete barrier. Her rifle flew from her hands as her shoulder struck the wall with a sickening crack. For those crucial seconds, as pain shot through her body and her vision blurred, she had struggled to reach her weapon. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the neurological shock of the impact. The medical team had rushed in. The evaluation had been terminated, and her fate had been sealed. Medical disqualification due to stress-induced motor instability, the report had read. Candidate demonstrates significant hand tremors under combat conditions. Unsuitable for precision marksmanship roles. What the report hadn't mentioned was that she had been attempting to continue the evaluation even while injured. It hadn't recorded her perfect scores in every other assessment. It certainly hadn't captured the fact that her tremors were the result of a concussion, not psychological. Breakdown. Staff, Sergeant Pierce's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "Montgomery, communications briefing in 10 minutes. Try not to drop anything important. We all know how that goes." The mess hall erupted in snickers and barely concealed laughter. Pierce had made it his personal mission to remind everyone of her failure at every possible opportunity. He was a thick-set man with small, cruel eyes who seemed to take genuine pleasure in her humiliation. Rachel set down her fork, her appetite gone. 2.5 years of this. 2.5 years of being the unit's cautionary tale, their living reminder of what happened when someone reached beyond their capabilities. She had been assigned to communications, a safe, non-combat role where her condition couldn't endanger anyone. Radio operator, message relay, equipment maintenance. Important work, certainly, but not the kind of duty she had trained for. But Pierce and the others didn't know about her midnight ritual. When the barracks fell quiet and the base settled into its nighttime routine, Rachel would slip out to the abandoned equipment shed behind the motor pool. There, in the darkness, she practiced everything Master Sergeant Dalton had taught her at ESCS: breathing techniques, sight alignment, trigger control, range estimation. Her hands never shook during those sessions. They were steady as granite, precise as surgical instruments. She kept Dalton's gift in her breast pocket, a single, specially marked round that her instructor had pressed into her palm on her last day at the academy. "This bullet is different from the others," he had said, his weathered face serious. "Only fire it when you're absolutely certain it will save a life. When everything else has failed and this is the only option left." The brass was warm against her chest now, a constant reminder of the marksman she could have been, should have been. Master Sergeant Dalton had been the only instructor who believed in her potential, while others focused on her final evaluation. Failure, he had seen her complete record, perfect scores in marksmanship theory, exceptional performance in field exercises, and an intuitive understanding of ballistics that couldn't be taught. He had fought the medical board's decision, submitting appeal after appeal, each one documenting her actual capabilities versus the isolated incident that had derailed her career. "The best snipers aren't the ones who never miss," Dalton had told her during their final conversation. "They're the ones who can make impossible shots when everything is falling apart around them. Remember that, Montgomery. Someday, you'll get a chance to prove what you're really made of." As Rachel walked toward the communications building, passing more smirking faces and whispered comments, she wondered if that day would ever come. The bullet felt heavier in her pocket, like it was waiting for something. She had no idea that within 48 hours, she would face the kind of crisis that would test everything she had learned and everything she had been told. She couldn't do. The communications briefing room was already filled with the usual suspects. When she arrived, Charlie Company's finest, all of them looking bored and slightly resentful at being pulled away from their evening routine. Pierce stood at the front of the room, his arms crossed, waiting for complete attention before beginning. "Listen up," he barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never questioned his own competence. "We've got a situation developing in Devil's Canyon. General Blackstone's convoy was ambushed during a routine inspection tour. The general and 3 staff members are missing, presumed captured. Intelligence suggests they're being held in a fortified position approximately 15 clicks northeast of here." Rachel's pulse quickened. General Blackstone was one of the most respected commanders in the theater, a man whose strategic brilliance had saved countless lives over his 30-year career. If he was in enemy hands, the implications went far beyond a simple rescue mission. Pierce continued, his eyes scanning the room but carefully avoiding Rachel's corner. "This is a high-priority extraction. We move out at 0400 hours. Full combat. Load, night vision, the works. Command wants this done fast and clean." His gaze finally found Rachel, cold and dismissive. "Montgomery, you'll handle communications from the base. Monitor all frequencies and relay any intelligence updates. That's it. No field work, no heroics, no playing soldier." Private Mason, a young soldier barely out of basic training, raised his hand nervously. "Sergeant, what about sniper support? Devil's Canyon has a lot of elevated positions. If the enemy has overwatch, we'll handle any threats as they develop." Pierce cut him off. "We don't need some academy washout with shaky hands trying to play hero. This is real combat, not some training exercise where you get second chances." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air like smoke. Rachel felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that reacting only made the situation worse. But as the briefing continued and Pierce outlined the mission parameters, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the plan. Devil's Canyon was notorious for its complex terrain, narrow passes, multiple elevation changes, and countless hiding spots for enemy snipers. The extraction route Pierce had chosen was direct but exposed, offering little cover and numerous ambush points. Any competent enemy force would have that area locked down tight. After the briefing, as the soldiers filed out to prepare their equipment, Corporal Rivers approached Rachel's position. Rivers was older than most, a career soldier who had seen enough combat to recognize both competence and incompetence when he saw it. Unlike the others, he had never participated in the mockery of Rachel's situation. "Montgomery," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "I was at the base when you first arrived. Saw your academy scores before all the ... Other stuff became common knowledge. Those were some impressive numbers." Rachel looked up, surprised by the unexpected comment. "That was a long time ago, Corporal." "Maybe," Rivers replied, his expression thoughtful. "But numbers like that don't just disappear. Whatever happened at that school, it doesn't change what you were capable of then." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Devil's Canyon is sniper country. If something goes wrong out there, we might need every available asset." Before Rachel could respond, Rivers was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that tomorrow's mission was going to be more dangerous than anyone realized. She touched the bullet in her pocket, remembering Dalton's words about impossible shots and proving what she was made of. Outside, the desert wind howled through the base's structures, carrying with it the promise of violence and the opportunity for redemption. Rachel had no way of knowing that in less than 12 hours she would face a choice that would change everything, not just for herself, but for a general whose life would depend on the steady hands of a soldier everyone had written off as broken. The memory of her final day at Elite Sniper Command School haunted Rachel like a recurring nightmare. Every detail burned into her consciousness with crystalline clarity. 3 years had passed, but she could still smell the cordite in the air, still feel the Arizona sun beating down on the concrete range where her dreams had died. It had started as the most important day of her military career. Final evaluation, ESCS, was the culmination of 6 months of the most intensive training the military had to offer. Only 12 candidates remained from the original class of 48, and Rachel had been leading the pack in every measurable category. Her marksmanship scores were exceptional, her tactical knowledge flawless, her psychological evaluations showed remarkable stability under pressure. "Today separates the marksman from the snipers," Master Sergeant Dalton had told the assembled candidates that morning. His weathered face was serious as he addressed the small group gathered on Range 7, the Academy's most challenging course. "Everything you've learned, everything you've practiced, comes down to the next 4 hours. This isn't about perfect conditions or controlled environments. This is about making shots that matter when everything is going wrong." Rachel had felt confident, prepared. She'd spent the previous night cleaning her rifle with obsessive care, checking and rechecking every component. Her M24 sniper weapon system was an extension of herself after months of training. She knew its quirks, its capabilities, its limitations better than she knew her own heartbeat. The weapon that would later be branded as too dangerous for her. Shaking hands had felt solid and reassuring in her grip. The evaluation began at dawn with a series of precision shots at varying distances. 600 meters, 800 meters, finally pushing out to the full 1,000-meter range that separated elite snipers from merely competent marksmen. Rachel's shots were textbook perfect, each bullet finding its mark with surgical precision. Each impact photographed and measured by the range officers. "Outstanding work, Montgomery," Sergeant First Class Webb had commented after her 8th consecutive hit. Webb was one of the Academy's senior instructors, a man whose approval was rarely given and never unearned. "Your windage calculations are spot on, and your elevation adjustments are instinctive. Keep this up, and you'll graduate at the top of your class." But the real test was yet to come. The final phase of evaluation was designed to simulate combat conditions as closely as possible without actually putting candidates in mortal danger. Simulated artillery strikes, smoke screens, time pressure, and multiple target engagement, all while maintaining the precision that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Rachel had been positioned in a prone shooting stance behind a concrete barrier, her rifle steady on its bipod, when the first simulated explosion erupted 200 meters to her left. The sound was deafening, but she maintained her composure, tracking her assigned target through the scope while debris rained down around her position. Her first shot was perfect, dead center mass on a silhouette representing an enemy commander. "Target down," came the voice through her earpiece. "Transition to secondary target, bearing 270 degrees, range 900 meters. She had been adjusting her scope, calculating the new firing solution, when the training accident occurred. The second simulated explosion was supposed to detonate at a safe distance, designed to create noise and concussion without actual danger. But something had gone wrong with the timing mechanism, and the charge detonated barely 50 meters from her position. The blast wave hit Rachel like a physical wall, lifting her off the ground and hurling her backward into the concrete barrier behind her shooting position. Her rifle flew from her hands as her shoulder and head struck the wall with sickening force. For several seconds, her vision grayed at the edges, and she tasted blood in her mouth from where she'd bitten her tongue. But even through the pain and disorientation, her training kicked in. Rachel's first instinct wasn't to call for help or assess her injuries. It was to retrieve her weapon. She crawled across the concrete, her movements unsteady, reaching for the M24 that had landed several feet away. Her hands trembled as she grasped the rifle, not from fear or psychological breakdown, but from the neurological effects of the concussion she'd just sustained. The range safety officers had rushed to her position. Medical personnel close behind. Candidate down, someone was shouting into a radio. "We need immediate medical evaluation on range 7. Rachel tried to protest, tried to explain that she could continue, but her words came out slurred and unfocused. "I'm fine," she had insisted, even as her vision swam and her hands shook uncontrollably. "Just give me a minute. I can finish the evaluation." But the damage was done. The medical team documented her symptoms with clinical precision: mild concussion, possible shoulder separation, and most damning of all, observable hand tremors that lasted for nearly 20 minutes after the blast. Master Sergeant Dalton had arrived at the medical station as the doctors finished their examination. His face was grim as he read the preliminary report, understanding immediately what it would mean for Rachel's career. "This was a training accident," he told the medical officer. "The explosion was closer than intended. Her reaction is completely normal given the circumstances. But military bureaucracy doesn't care about circumstances or context." Within hours, Rachel found herself sitting across from a medical review board, trying to explain why her hands had been shaking after sustaining what was essentially a mild traumatic brain injury. The board members listened politely to her account, reviewed the documentation of her stellar performance prior to the accident, and then delivered their verdict with clinical detachment. "While we acknowledge candidate Montgomery's exceptional performance throughout the majority of her training," the board chairman had read from his prepared statement, "the observed motor instability during a high-stress combat simulation raises serious concerns about her suitability for precision marksmanship roles. The safety of her fellow soldiers and the success of military operations cannot be compromised by personnel who may experience degraded performance under battlefield conditions." Rachel had sat in stunned silence as her dreams evaporated with bureaucratic efficiency. 6 months of perfect scores, flawless evaluations, and unwavering dedication reduced to a single moment of involuntary physiological response to head trauma. Her military career wasn't ending. She would still serve, still contribute, but the path she had chosen, the calling she had felt so deeply, was close to her forever. Master Sergeant Dalton had requested a private meeting after the board's decision was announced. They met in his office, a Spartanly furnished room decorated only with photographs of his former students and their achievements. "This is wrong, Montgomery," he had said without preamble. "This decision is based on fear and bureaucratic ass covering, not on your actual capabilities. It doesn't matter now, Rachel had replied, her voice hollow. The decision's been made. I'm officially unsuitable for sniper operations. Dalton had reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a single rifle cartridge, different from the standard ammunition used in training. The brass casing was slightly tarnished, and strange markings were etched near the base. This bullet is special, he had said, pressing it into her palm. I've carried it for 23 years through 3 deployments, and more combat operations than I care to remember. It's never been fired, but it's been present for every shot that saved a life. Rachel had examined the cartridge, noting its unusual weight and the way it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Why are you giving this to me? Because someday you're going to face a moment where everything depends on a single shot, Dalton had replied. When that moment comes, you'll remember everything I taught you about patience, precision, and purpose. This bullet isn't about accuracy or equipment or perfect conditions. It's about doing what's right when everyone else has given up hope. As Rachel was processed out of ESCS, receiving her new assignment to Forward Operating Base Ironclad, Dalton had made one final promise. I'm going to keep fighting this decision, he had told her. I'm going to document every detail of what really happened, and I'm going to make sure the right people see it. This isn't over, Montgomery. Not by a long shot. But 3 years had passed since then, and Rachel was still carrying radio equipment instead of a sniper rifle. Still enduring the whispers and mockery of soldiers who saw only her failure, not the circumstances that had caused it. Still wondering if she would ever get the chance to prove that her hands were steady when it mattered most. The bullet remained in her breast pocket, a constant reminder of potential unfulfilled and promises unkept. Tomorrow's mission to Devil's Canyon would test many things: Charlie Company's tactical abilities, Staff Sergeant Pierce's leadership under pressure, and the enemy's determination to hold their prisoners. But Rachel had no idea that it would also test whether a single shot, fired by hands that everyone believed were too shaky to matter, could change the course of history. The alarm clock's harsh buzzing cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 0430 hours, just as it had every morning for the past 2.5 years. Rachel Montgomery rolled out of her narrow bunk with practiced efficiency, her body moving through the familiar routine of another day at Forward Operating Base Ironclad. Around her, the other soldiers in the communications barracks stirred fitfully, most of them pulling pillows over their heads to block out the sound. Unlike the infantry barracks where combat soldiers prepared for dangerous missions with adrenaline and nervous energy, the communication section woke to another day of routine maintenance, radio checks, and equipment inspections. Safe work, important work, but not the kind of duty that earned respect or recognition in a combat zone. Rachel dressed quickly in the darkness, pulling on her uniform with the same mechanical precision she brought to everything else in her carefully controlled existence. Every morning was identical: uniform inspection in the mirror, gear check, 20 minutes of physical training behind the barracks where no one could see her, then breakfast alone at her corner table while the real soldiers discussed real missions. By 0500 hours, she was at her assigned workstation in the communications center, a cramped, air-conditioned trailer filled with radio equipment and computer terminals. Her supervisor, Sergeant First Class Duncan, was already there, reviewing the overnight message traffic with his perpetual expression of mild irritation. "Morning, Montgomery," Duncan said without looking up from his clipboard. "We've got equipment maintenance scheduled for 0800, and Division wants a communications check with all forward observation posts by 1000. Think you can handle that without any dramatic breakdowns?" Duncan wasn't intentionally cruel like Staff Sergeant Pierce, but his casual dismissiveness was almost worse. He treated Rachel like a piece of equipment that had failed its quality control inspection, functional enough for basic tasks, but never to be trusted with anything important. She had proven herself competent at her communications duties hundreds of times over, but competence wasn't enough to overcome her reputation. "No problem, Sergeant," Rachel replied, settling into her chair and beginning the morning diagnostic. Routine. Her hands moved across the radio controls with practiced skill, tuning frequencies and checking signal strength, with the expertise born of endless repetition. The irony wasn't lost on her. Everyone spoke about her supposedly shaky hands, but she had never made a single error in her communications duties. Not once in 2.5 years. As the morning progressed, Rachel found herself monitoring the tactical frequencies used by the base's combat units. It was part of her official duties, but she had developed the habit of listening more carefully than required, using her training to analyze the tactical situations being discussed. Old habits from her academy days when understanding battlefield dynamics had been central to her identity as a soldier. Charlie Company was conducting patrol operations in Sector 7, about 12 kilometers northeast of the base. From the radio chatter, Rachel could tell they were moving through difficult terrain, checking abandoned compounds for signs of enemy activity. Staff Sergeant Pierce's voice came through the speakers periodically, issuing orders with his characteristic blend of competence and arrogance. "Overwatch, this is Charlie 6. Pierce's voice crackled through the static. "We've got movement in Building Delta 4. Looks like 3 individuals, no weapons visible. Moving to investigate." Rachel automatically plotted the coordinates on her tactical map, a skill that had become second nature during her academy training. Building Delta 4 was part of an abandoned industrial complex that intelligence had been watching for months. The structure offered excellent concealment and fields of fire, exactly the kind of position she would choose if she were planning an ambush. Her analysis was interrupted by the arrival of Private Mason, one of the younger soldiers from Charlie Company who had been left behind for equipment maintenance. Mason was barely 19, fresh-faced and eager, one of the few soldiers on base who didn't treat Rachel with either mockery or dismissive indifference. "Hey, Montgomery," Mason said, approaching her workstation hesitantly. "I was wondering if I could ask you something. It's about marksmanship." Rachel looked up from her radio console, surprised. In 2.5 years, no one had asked her advice about shooting. "What's the question, Mason?" The young soldier glanced around nervously, making sure they weren't overheard. "I'm having trouble with long-range shots. Can't seem to get consistent. Groups past 400 meters. My breathing's good, my fundamentals are solid, but something's not clicking." He paused, his expression earnest. "I heard you went to sniper school, before the ... you know. I thought maybe you could give me some pointers." For a moment, Rachel felt a familiar spark of excitement at the prospect of discussing marksmanship. Technique. Then reality crashed back down. "Mason, I'm not qualified to give shooting instruction. You should talk to your squad leader or request time with one of the designated marksmen." "I did," Mason replied quickly. "Pierce just told me to practice more and stop making excuses. But I am practicing every chance I get. I just feel like I'm missing something fundamental." Despite herself, Rachel found her instructor instincts taking over. "What's your natural respiratory pause like? Are you breaking the shot at the natural point of rest, or are you trying to force the timing?" Mason's eyes lit up. "That's just it. I think I'm forcing it. Trying to time the shot instead of letting it happen naturally. But I don't know how to fix it." "The secret isn't in your hands or your trigger finger," Rachel explained, her voice taking on the same patient tone Master Sergeant Dalton had used during her own training. "It's in your breathing pattern. You need to establish a rhythm that works with your natural physiology, not against it. Most shooters try to hold their breath too long, which creates tension and affects stability." They talked for 20 minutes about breathing techniques, sight picture, and the mental aspects of precision shooting. Rachel found herself drawing on knowledge she hadn't used in years, concepts and techniques that had been drilled into her during her academy training. It Felt good to remember that she actually knew these things, that her education hadn't been completely wasted. "This is really helpful," Mason said as their conversation wound down. "I can already see where I've been going wrong." "Thanks, Montgomery. I wish more people around here realized how much you actually know about this stuff." After Mason left, Rachel sat quietly at her workstation, remembering what it felt like to be valued for her expertise rather than pitied for her failure. The young soldier's enthusiasm reminded her of her own eagerness during the early days at ESCS, when every lesson had been a revelation and every successful shot had brought her closer to her dream, but those memories also brought pain. She thought about the midnight practice session she conducted behind the equipment shed, where she worked through the techniques Master Sergeant Dalton had taught her. In the darkness, with no one watching and no pressure to perform, her hands were absolutely steady. Her shots were precise, controlled, textbook perfect. But those sessions were a secret she could never share, because admitting to them would only invite more mockery. The base's unofficial shooting competition was held every month, open to all personnel regardless of military occupational specialty. Rachel had never participated, knowing that her presence would only provide Pierce and his followers with another opportunity for humiliation. But she had watched from a distance, analyzing the competitors' techniques and noting their mistakes. She could have won those competitions easily, but proving her skill would have required acknowledging that she still practiced, still cared, still believed in abilities that everyone else had written off. As her shift continued, Rachel found herself thinking about tomorrow's mission to Devil's Canyon. The tactical briefing had been light on details, but she knew enough about the terrain to understand the challenges Charlie Company would face. The canyon was a natural fortress, offering numerous defensive positions and limited approach routes. If General Blackstone was being held there, his captors had chosen their ground well. She pulled up satellite imagery of the area on her computer terminal, studying the topographical features with the eye of a trained sniper. Multiple elevation changes, overlapping fields of fire, natural concealment. It was textbook sniper country. Any rescue attempt would require careful planning and, most likely, precision fire support to neutralize enemy overwatch positions. But that wasn't her concern anymore. Her job was to monitor communications from the safety of the base, to relay messages and coordinate with higher headquarters while real soldiers did the dangerous work. She would listen to the mission unfold over the radio, knowing that her skills and training could make a difference, but forbidden from participating in anything beyond her carefully circumscribed role. That evening, after her shift ended, Rachel made her way to the equipment shed behind the motor pool. The routine was always the same. Wait until after evening chow, when most of the base was relaxing or preparing for sleep, then slip away to her private sanctuary. She had modified the shed's interior over the months, creating a basic shooting position where she could practice dry firing exercises and work on her fundamentals. In the darkness, with only the distant sounds of the base's nighttime activity. For company, Rachel went through her practice routine. Breathing control, sight alignment, trigger pressure, natural point of aim, all the techniques that had once made her one of the top candidates at ESCS. Her hands were rock steady, her movements controlled and precise. The soldier who supposedly couldn't handle a rifle, under stress, moved through training exercises with fluid expertise. As she finished her practice session, Rachel touched the special bullet in her breast pocket, feeling its familiar weight and texture. Master Sergeant Dalton's words echoed in her memory. Someday, you're going to face a moment where everything depends on a single shot. She wondered if that moment would ever come, or if she was destined to spend her entire military career living in the shadow of a training accident that had defined her more than any achievement ever could. Tomorrow, Charlie Company would venture into Devil's Canyon to attempt a rescue that could easily become a suicide mission. Rachel would monitor their progress from the safety of the communication center, listening to events unfold while contributing nothing more than radio relay services. It was a fate she had accepted, a limitation she had learned to live with. Deep in her heart, she still believed that given the chance, her steady hands could make a difference when it mattered most. The Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Ironclad hummed with nervous energy as Charlie Company assembled for the final mission briefing. Rachel sat in the back row of folding chairs, her communications equipment bag at her feet, feeling like an observer rather than a participant in the gravity of what was about to unfold. The room was packed with the base's most experienced soldiers, each one understanding that the next 12 hours would determine whether General Blackstone lived or died. Colonel Frost, the base commander, stood at the front of the room beside a large tactical display showing satellite imagery of Devil's Canyon. His weathered face was grim as he addressed the assembled soldiers, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility that came with sending men into harm's way. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, his eyes briefly finding Rachel in the back. "Row, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. 18 hours ago, General Marcus Blackstone's convoy was ambushed while conducting a routine inspection of forward observation posts. The general and 3 members of his staff are missing, presumed captured by enemy forces operating in the Devil's Canyon area." A murmur rippled through the room. General Blackstone was a legend in the military, a man whose tactical innovations had revolutionized modern warfare and whose personal courage had inspired a generation of soldiers. The thought of him in enemy hands was almost unthinkable. Colonel Frost clicked a remote, and the display changed to show detailed topographical maps of the target area. "Intelligence indicates the general is being held in a fortified compound, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of our position. The location is tactically significant, high ground, multiple escape routes, and excellent fields of fire in all directions. Whoever chose this position knows what they're doing." Staff Sergeant Pierce leaned forward in his chair, studying the maps with professional interest. Despite his personal flaws, he was an experienced combat leader who understood the challenges they would face. "Sir, what's our intelligence on enemy strength and capabilities?" "Estimate 15 to 20 combatants, well-armed and professionally trained," Colonel Frost replied. "They've had 18 hours to prepare defensive positions, and they know we're coming. This won't be a surprise raid, it's going to be a direct assault against a prepared enemy." Captain Stone, the base intelligence officer, stepped forward to add details. "Drone reconnaissance shows at least 3 sniper positions on the high ground overlooking the compound. These aren't amateur fighters. Their positioning and camouflage are textbook professional. Any approach to the target will be under constant observation and fire." Rachel felt her stomach tighten as she studied the tactical display. From her position in the back of the room, she could see details that others might miss: the precise placement of the enemy positions, the calculated fields of fire, the way the defensive setup channeled any assault force into predetermined kill zones. It was expertly done, the work of someone who understood both terrain and tactics. Pierce raised his hand again. "What about air support? Can we get close air support or artillery to soften up those positions?" Colonel Frost shook his head. "Negative. The general and his staff are being held in the main compound building. Any heavy firepower risks killing the people we're trying to rescue. This has to be done with precision, surgical strikes to neutralize threats while keeping our primary objectives alive." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were being asked to assault a fortified position held by professional soldiers without the benefit of overwhelming firepower, against an enemy who had every tactical advantage. It was the kind of mission that made careers or ended lives, with very little middle ground between success and catastrophe. "Here's how we're going to do this," Pierce said, standing and moving to the tactical display. His voice carried the confidence of a leader who had planned dozens of similar operations, even if none had carried quite these stakes. We'll approach in 2 teams. Alpha Team takes the northern route, using the creek bed for concealment. Bravo Team circles around to the east, setting up overwatch positions to suppress enemy fire. Rachel studied Pierce's plan with growing concern. The approach routes he had chosen were predictable, following the most obvious paths of advance. Any competent defender would have those areas pre-targeted, ready to deliver devastating fire the moment an assault began. It was exactly the kind of direct conventional thinking that got soldiers killed against a prepared enemy. "What about the sniper positions?" Corporal Rivers asked. "Intelligence says they've got at least 3 overwatch points. How do we neutralize those without alerting the entire compound?" Pierce's expression tightened slightly. "We'll suppress them with concentrated fire once the assault begins. Speed and aggression will carry us through their kill zones before they can inflict significant casualties." It was a terrible plan, Rachel realized with growing horror. Pierce was essentially proposing to charge directly into prepared positions, hoping that momentum would overcome superior positioning and firepower. Against amateur fighters, it might work. Against the professionals they would be facing, it was a recipe for disaster. "Sir," she found herself saying, her voice cutting through the tactical discussion. The room turned to look at her, surprise evident on every face. Rachel rarely spoke during briefings and never questioned tactical decisions. "I've been studying the terrain around Devil's Canyon. There might be alternative approaches that could reduce our exposure to those sniper positions." Pierce's face darkened. "Montgomery, your job is communications, not tactical planning. Leave the strategy to people who are qualified to make those decisions." "But if you look at the eastern ridge," Rachel continued, her voice steady despite the hostility radiating from Pierce, "there's a natural depression that runs parallel to the compound. It's not visible on the standard maps, but the satellite imagery shows." "Enough," Pierce cut her off sharply. "I don't need advice from someone who couldn't even complete sniper school. This is a combat operation, not a training exercise where everyone gets participation trophies." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter, but Rachel noticed that some of the more experienced soldiers were looking at the imagery she had referenced. Corporal Rivers, in particular, seemed to be studying the eastern approach with renewed interest. Colonel Frost intervened before the situation could escalate further. "All right, that's enough discussion. Pierce, your plan is approved. Teams will move out at 0400 hours full combat load. Expected time on target is 0630, just after sunrise." He turned to address the entire room. "I want to be clear about something. General Blackstone has saved more lives than any single officer in this theater. He's a good man, and he doesn't deserve to die in enemy hands because we weren't brave enough or smart enough to bring him home. Questions?" Private Mason raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, what if the rescue attempt fails? What if we can't reach the general?" The colonel's expression grew even more serious. "Then we make sure his captors pay the highest possible price for what they've done. But failure is not an option, son. We bring our people home, whatever it takes." As the briefing broke up and soldiers began filing out to prepare their equipment, Rachel remained in her seat, staring at the tactical display. She could see the flaws in Pierce's plan with devastating clarity: the predictable approach routes, the failure to account for enemy positioning, the reliance on speed over stealth. But her opinion didn't matter. Her expertise was unwelcome. Her role was to sit safely in the communications center while better soldiers did the dangerous work. Corporal Rivers approached her as she finally stood to leave. "Montgomery," he said quietly, "that alternative approach you mentioned, the depression on the eastern ridge, how close does it get to the compound?" Rachel glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Within 300 meters of the main building. It's concealed from the primary sniper positions, and there's a clear line of sight to the compound. Entrance, it would be perfect for what?" Rivers prompted. For overwatch, Rachel finished. Someone positioned there could provide precision fire support for the assault teams. Neutralize specific threats without risking collateral damage to the hostages. Rivers nodded slowly. Someone with the right training and equipment could make a real difference from that position. Yes, Rachel agreed. If they had someone qualified to take the shot. Their eyes met for a moment, an understanding passing between them that neither could voice aloud. Rivers had been at the base when Rachel first arrived, before her reputation preceded her. He had seen her academy scores, knew what she had been capable of before the bureaucracy labeled her unfit for duty. "Good briefing, Montgomery," Rivers said finally. "I hope your communications equipment works flawlessly tomorrow." As Rachel gathered her gear and headed back to the communications center, she felt the weight of Master Sergeant Dalton's bullet against her chest. Tomorrow, Charlie Company would assault Devil's Canyon using a plan that would likely get half of them killed. General Blackstone would probably die in the crossfire, and Pierce would blame the failure on inadequate intelligence or enemy luck. But Rachel would be safe in her air-conditioned trailer, monitoring radio frequencies while better soldiers paid the price for tactical decisions she could see were wrong. It was the role she had been assigned, the limitation she had accepted. The steady hands that might make a difference would remain unused, another casualty of bureaucratic fear and institutional blindness. Tomorrow would bring violence, sacrifice, and very likely tragedy. And there was nothing she could do to change any of it, or so she thought. The pre-dawn darkness felt oppressive as Charlie Company loaded into their armored vehicles at Forward Operating Base Ironclad. Rachel stood in the motor pool, watching the controlled chaos of combat preparations while clutching her communications gear with white knuckles. Around her, soldiers checked weapons, adjusted body armor, and engaged in the familiar rituals that preceded dangerous missions, some joking nervously, others maintaining grim silence, all of them understanding that not everyone might return. Staff. Sergeant Pierce moved through the ranks with practiced efficiency, conducting final equipment inspections and delivering last-minute tactical reminders. Despite his personal failings, he was undeniably competent at the mechanical aspects of leadership. His soldiers were properly equipped, their gear was functional, and their understanding of the mission parameters was clear. What worried Rachel was his stubborn adherence to a tactical plan that ignored the realities of the terrain they would face. "Montgomery," Pierce called out as she approached the communications vehicle. "You'll monitor all tactical frequencies. From here, relay any intelligence updates to the assault teams and maintain contact with base command. Most importantly, stay out of the way and don't try to play soldier. This is real combat, not some academy training exercise." "Understood, Sergeant," Rachel replied, her voice steady despite the frustration burning in her chest. She had studied the mission parameters obsessively throughout the night, identifying at least 6 major flaws in Pierce's approach, but her expertise was unwelcome, her suggestions dismissed as the desperate attempts of a failed sniper to regain relevance. Private Mason appeared at her elbow, his young face tense with pre-mission nerves. "Hey, Montgomery," he said quietly. "Thanks for that advice about breathing techniques. I tried it on the range yesterday, and my groups tightened up immediately." "I'm glad it helped," Rachel said, touched by the young soldier's gratitude. "Remember, the fundamentals matter most when everything else is falling apart." "I'll remember," Mason promised. Then, with a glance around to ensure they weren't overheard, he added, "I wish you were coming with us. Having someone with your training watching our backs would make me feel a lot better about this mission." Before Rachel could respond, Pierce's voice cut across the motor pool. "Mount up. We move out in 2 minutes." The organized chaos intensified as soldiers climbed into their vehicles, weapons clattering against the armored sides as they settled into their positions. Rachel took her assigned seat in the communications vehicle, a heavily armored truck equipped with advanced radio systems and satellite uplinks. Her position gave her access to all tactical frequencies, intelligence updates, and direct communication with Base Command. It was an important role, critical to mission success, but it felt like exile from the action that would determine whether General Blackstone lived or died. The convoy pulled out of the base as the eastern horizon began to show the first faint traces of dawn. Rachel monitored the radio chatter as they moved through the initial phases of the approach, listening to the tactical updates and position reports that painted a picture of the developing operation. The professional competence of the soldiers was evident in their communications, clear, concise, focused on mission requirements rather than personal concerns. "Overwatch, this is Charlie 6. Pierce's voice crackled through the speakers. "We're approaching phase line Alpha. No enemy contact. Visibility is improving with the sunrise. Continuing to objective." Colonel Frost's voice responded from Base Command. "Copy, Charlie 6. Intelligence reports no change in enemy disposition. Maintain operational security and proceed as planned." As the convoy approached Devil's Canyon, Rachel found herself studying the terrain through the vehicle's armored windows. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, characterized by steep rocky outcroppings, narrow defiles, and elevation changes that created natural defensive positions. It was exactly the kind of terrain that favored defenders over attackers, where a few well-positioned soldiers could hold off a much larger force. The convoy halted approximately 2 kilometers from the target area, at a rally point concealed behind a ridge that blocked them from enemy observation. Rachel watched through her vehicle's periscope as the assault teams dismounted and began their final preparations. Weapons were checked one last time, ammunition distributed, and communications tested before the soldiers disappeared into the broken terrain that would lead them to their objective. "All stations, this is Charlie 6, Pierce transmitted. Teams are moving to assault positions. Estimated time to target contact is 30 minutes. Overwatch, maintain radio watch and be prepared for immediate close air support requests." "Roger." "Charlie 6, came the response from Base Command. "All support assets are standing by. Execute when ready." Rachel settled into her monitoring routine, tracking the progress of both assault teams through their position reports and tactical updates. Alpha Team was moving through the northern approach, using the creek bed for concealment, just as Pierce had planned. Bravo Team was circling to the east, preparing to establish overwatch positions for the final assault. But as she listened to the radio traffic, Rachel's growing understanding of the tactical situation filled her with dread. The assault teams were moving exactly where any competent defender would expect them to go, following the most obvious routes of approach without considering that their movements might be anticipated and pre-targeted. "Charlie 1-1, this is Charlie 6. Pierce's voice came through the speakers. "What's your status on the northern approach?" Corporal Rivers' voice responded from Alpha Team's position. "Moving slow through the creek bed. Lots of natural concealment, but the terrain is rougher than expected. We're behind schedule by about 10 minutes. Copy. Maintain pace and prepare for final assault in 15 minutes. Rachel plotted their positions on her tactical map, noting how the converging approach routes would bring both teams into the enemy's primary kill zones simultaneously. It was exactly what she would expect from a conventionally trained soldier like Pierce, tactically sound according to textbook principles, but predictable to an enemy who understood those same principles. "Contact! Contact!" The radio suddenly erupted with urgent transmissions. "This is Charlie 2-2. We've got movement on the eastern ridge. Multiple combatants in concealed positions. They're tracking our approach." Rachel's blood ran cold as she realized the enemy had been watching Charlie Company's movement from the beginning. The professional fighters holding General Blackstone had positioned themselves to observe all the likely approach routes, and they were now preparing to spring a carefully planned ambush. "All stations, this is Charlie 6. Pierce's voice cut through the tactical frequency. Tension evident despite his attempt to maintain composure. Enemy has visual contact with Bravo team. Accelerate timeline and prepare for immediate assault. We're going in now. The sound of gunfire began echoing across Devil's Canyon, carried by the desert wind to Rachel's position 2 kilometers away. Through her headset, she could hear the controlled chaos of combat communications as both assault teams came under fire from multiple directions. The enemy had waited until Charlie Company was committed to their approach routes, then opened fire with devastating effect. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 1-1, Rivers transmitted, his voice strained. We're pinned down in the creek bed. Enemy has overwatch positions on both sides of our approach. Request immediate suppression fire. Charlie 2-2 is taking heavy casualties, came another transmission. Enemy sniper has us zeroed in. We can't move without taking fire. Rachel listened to the developing disaster with growing horror, recognizing that Pierce's conventional tactics were playing directly into the enemy's hands. The assault teams were trapped in predetermined kill zones, unable to advance or retreat, without exposing themselves to devastating fire from elevated positions. Overwatch, this is Charlie 6. Pierce's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. We need immediate close air support. Coordinates to follow. Negative Charlie 6. Colonel Frost's voice came back immediately. Close air support is denied. Too much risk of collateral damage to the hostages. You need to find another solution. The radio fell silent for several seconds, filled only with the distant sound of automatic weapons fire and the occasional explosion of grenades. Rachel could hear the tactical situation deteriorating in real time, understanding that Charlie Company was walking into exactly the kind of disaster she had feared. Then Pierce's voice came through the speakers again, carrying a note of desperation that she had never heard from him before. All stations. We're going to need a miracle here. Enemy has us dialed in from multiple positions, and we can't get close enough to effect a rescue. Rachel touched the special bullet in her breast pocket, feeling its familiar weight against her fingers. Master Sergeant Dalton's words echoed in her memory. Someday, you're going to face a moment where everything depends on a single shot. As the sounds of battle intensified and the radio chatter grew more desperate, Rachel began to understand that this might be the moment Dalton had been talking about. The moment when her supposedly shaky hands might be the only thing standing between General Blackstone and death. But she was 2 kilometers away from the action, confined to a communications vehicle, forbidden from participating in anything beyond radio relay duties. Her rifle was locked in the vehicle's weapons rack, and her orders were clear: monitor the radio and stay out of the way. The question was whether she could bring herself to disobey those orders when everything was falling apart and lives hung in the balance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sniper's bullet struck Private Mason in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind a boulder in the creek bed. His agonized cry cut through the tactical radio frequency like a knife, immediately followed by Corporal Rivers' urgent voice. Sniper! Sniper in the rocks, approximately 800 meters to our northeast. Rachel's hands clenched around her radio headset as she listened to the nightmare unfolding. Through the cacophony of gunfire and shouted commands, she could hear the systematic destruction of Charlie Company's assault plan. The enemy wasn't just shooting at them. They were methodically picking apart the attack with professional precision. Charlie 2-2 is completely pinned down, came another transmission, this one from Specialist Crews. We've got at least 2 shooters on the eastern ridge. Every time we try to move, they drop steel on us. We're trapped. Staff Sergeant Pierce's voice cut through the chaos, trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his ability to manage. All stations, this is Charlie 6. Consolidate positions and maintain suppressive fire. We're going to bound forward by teams, using covering fire to close the distance. Rachel wanted to scream into the radio. Pierce was still thinking conventionally, still trying to apply textbook tactics to a situation that required innovation and precision. The enemy had chosen their positions specifically to counter conventional approaches, and every minute Charlie Company spent trapped in those kill zones increased the likelihood that General Blackstone would be executed or moved to a more secure location. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 1-1, Rivers transmitted, his voice strained with effort and pain. Mason's hit bad. We need immediate medical evacuation, and we can't advance under this fire. Enemy has overlapping fields of observation from at least 3 positions. Negative on medical evacuation, Pierce responded. We complete the mission first, then we extract casualties. Prepare to advance on my command. It was exactly the wrong decision, Rachel realized with growing horror. Pierce was so focused on mission completion that he was ignoring the tactical reality facing his soldiers. They weren't just pinned down, they were being systematically destroyed by an enemy who had anticipated their every move. The sound of explosions began echoing across the canyon as the enemy started using grenades to flush Charlie Company out of their limited cover. Each detonation was followed by automatic weapons fire, creating a deadly rhythm that spoke to professional military training and careful preparation. Contact! Contact! Specialist Beck's voice screamed through the radio. Grenade in the creek. Bed, multiple casualties. Charlie 2-2, status report. Pierce demanded. We've got 3 men down, came the agonized reply. Beck's unconscious, Nash has shrapnel wounds, and I think Flynn's spine is injured. We need immediate medical support. Rachel could hear the desperation creeping into Pierce's voice as he realized his carefully planned assault was collapsing into disaster. Overwatch, this is Charlie 6. I need options here. We can't advance, we can't retreat, and the casualty count is climbing. Colonel Frost's voice came through the command frequency, carrying the weight of a commander who was watching his soldiers die without being able to help them. Charlie 6, what do you need? All support assets are standing by. I need those sniper positions neutralized. Pierce transmitted. We can't move as long as they have overwatch on our positions. Close air support is still denied due to hostage considerations, Frost replied. You need to find a way to deal with those positions using organic assets. The radio fell silent for several seconds, filled only with the distant sound of battle and the occasional scream of wounded soldiers. Rachel knew what Pierce was thinking. Charlie Company had no organic sniper support. Their designated marksmen were equipped for targets of opportunity, not for precision counter-sniper work at extended range. Then Rivers' voice came through the tactical frequency, carrying a note of desperate calculation. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 1-1. I've got an idea, but it's going to sound crazy. I'm listening, Pierce replied. Montgomery's got sniper training from ESCS. I know about the evaluation incident, but she knows this terrain and she understands counter-sniper techniques. If we could get her into position, absolutely not. Pierce cut him off immediately. Montgomery is communications only. I'm not going to watch soldiers die because some washout wants to play hero. Rachel felt something break inside her chest as she listened to Pierce dismiss the one option that might save his men's lives. Through her vehicle's periscope, she could see muzzle flashes from the enemy positions, each one representing another shot fired at trapped American soldiers. General Blackstone was probably going to die. Charlie Company was being systematically destroyed, and she was sitting 2 kilometers away with the skills to change everything. Charlie 6. At least consider it, Rivers pressed. We're running out of options here, and the casualty count is climbing. What do we have to lose? I said no. Pierce's voice carried a note of hysteria. Montgomery couldn't handle the pressure at sniper school, and she sure as hell can't handle it in real combat. The radio chatter continued, but Rachel had stopped. Listening. She was staring at her rifle, locked in the weapons rack, just 3 feet away from her position. Master Sergeant Dalton's words echoed in her memory with crystal clarity. Only fire this when you're absolutely certain it will save a life. Lives were being lost right now. Good soldiers were dying because of tactical decisions that ignored the realities of the battlefield. General Blackstone was probably going to be executed, and Pierce's stubborn refusal to consider alternatives was ensuring that the rescue mission would fail completely. Rachel looked at her communications equipment, then at her rifle, then at the tactical map showing the exact positions where her fellow soldiers were trapped. She had studied Devil's Canyon exhaustively, identifying multiple approach routes that could provide access to effective firing positions. The depression on the eastern ridge that she had mentioned during the briefing was less than a kilometer from her current location, and it offered a clear line of sight to the enemy sniper positions. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 1-1, Rivers transmitted again, his voice breaking with desperation. Mason's losing a lot of blood, and we can't get to him under this fire. Please just consider Montgomery's capabilities. What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen, Pierce replied with bitter fury, is that more soldiers die because I trusted someone who already proved she can't handle combat stress. That was the moment Rachel made her decision. She reached for the weapons rack, her hands steady as granite as she retrieved her M24 sniper weapon system. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, each action flowing naturally into the next as 3 years of suppressed training took over. She gathered her ammunition, her rangefinder, her ghillie suit components, everything she would need for what she was about to do. The communications radio continued to crackle with reports of mounting casualties and Pierce's increasingly desperate attempts to salvage his failing mission. As Rachel prepared to leave the vehicle, she keyed her microphone one final time. Overwatch. This is communications. I'm experiencing radio equipment malfunction. Going to backup systems and conducting field repairs. Will maintain monitoring capability. It was a lie, of course. Her equipment was functioning perfectly, but it would give her the cover story she needed to explain why she wasn't at her assigned position when everything was over. Rachel slipped out of the communications vehicle and into the pre-dawn darkness, her rifle across her back and Master Sergeant Dalton's special bullet in her breast pocket. For the first time in 3 years, she was moving toward combat instead of away from it. 2 kilometers away, Charlie Company continued to die in the kill zones of Devil's Canyon. But they were about to discover that the soldier they had written off as a failure was moving through the darkness to prove them wrong. The question was whether she could reach an effective firing position before Pierce's tactical incompetence got everyone killed. Rachel moved through the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost, every step deliberate and silent as she navigated the broken terrain leading toward Devil's Canyon. Her M24 sniper weapon system felt natural across her back, the familiar weight distribution, triggering muscle memory from countless hours of training. 3 years of forced inactivity fell away as her body remembered what it meant to be a hunter moving through hostile territory. The sounds of battle grew louder as she approached the canyon's rim, the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles, mixing with the chatter of automatic weapons and the occasional explosion of grenades. Through her earpiece, she could monitor the tactical frequency, listening to the systematic destruction of Charlie Company's assault as Pierce's conventional tactics played directly into the enemy's carefully planned defense. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 2-2. Specialist Cruz's voice crackled through the radio, tight with pain and desperation. Flynn's not responding, and Nash is going into shock. We need immediate medical evacuation, or we're going to lose them. Hold your position and maintain suppressive fire, Pierce responded, his own voice showing the strain of a leader watching his men die. Medical evacuation is not possible until we neutralize those sniper positions. Rachel reached the eastern Ridge and dropped prone behind a cluster of rocks, studying the tactical situation through her rifle scope. From her elevated position, she could see the entire battlefield spread out below her like a deadly chessboard. Charlie Company's soldiers were trapped in exactly the kill zone she had predicted, pinned down by enemy fire from multiple elevated positions. The enemy sniper positions were expertly chosen and well concealed. The primary shooter was approximately 800 meters to her northeast, positioned behind a natural rock formation that provided both concealment and an excellent field of fire over the creek bed, where Alpha Team was trapped. A second position, roughly 600 meters to the northwest, covered the eastern approach where Bravo Team had been caught in the open, but it was the third position that made Rachel's blood run cold. Nearly 1,000 meters away, on the highest point of the canyon's western rim, she could see the muzzle flash of a sniper who was systematically picking off any soldier who tried to move. This wasn't random fire or area suppression. Each shot was carefully aimed and precisely delivered, the work of a professional marksman who understood both his equipment and his craft. "Contact! Contact!" Private Webb's voice screamed through the radio. "Sniper on the high ground. Johnson's down. He's not moving." Rachel adjusted her scope, tracking the enemy shooter's position through the early morning haze. The range was extreme, nearly at the limit of her weapon's effective capability, and the environmental conditions were challenging. Desert thermals were creating heat shimmer, a crosswind was gusting unpredictably, and the angle of engagement required precise calculations for bullet drop and deflection. Through her earpiece, she could hear Pierce making increasingly desperate calls for support. "Overwatch, this is Charlie 6. We've got 4 men down, and we're completely pinned. I need options here." "Charlie 6, what about indirect fire?" Colonel Frost's voice came back from base command. "Can you adjust mortar fire onto those sniper positions?" Negative, Pierce replied. "The hostages are in the main compound, approximately 200 meters from the primary sniper position. Any indirect fire risks killing the people we're trying to rescue." Rachel understood the tactical dilemma with crystal clarity. The enemy had positioned their snipers close enough to the hostage compound that any area weapons would endanger General Blackstone and his staff. The only solution was precision fire, single, carefully aimed shots that could neutralize specific threats without collateral damage. She studied the primary sniper position through her scope, noting the way sunlight reflected off the shooter's scope lens as he acquired new targets. The enemy marksman was good, very good, but he was making the classic mistake of staying in one position too long. Professional snipers were taught to shoot and move, never allowing counter-snipers to track their location through multiple engagements. "Charlie 1-1, this is Charlie 6, Pierce transmitted. "Can you identify the sniper's exact position?" "Affirmative," Rivers replied, his voice strained with effort. "He's in the rocks approximately 800 meters northeast of our position. Every time one of us tries to move, he puts a round within inches of our heads." Rachel had the same target in her scope crosshairs. At 800 meters, with environmental factors considered, it would require a perfect shot executed under extreme pressure. The kind of shot that had made her reputation at ESCS before everything fell apart. The kind of shot that everyone now believed her incapable of making. "Charlie 6, this is Charlie 2-2. Cruz's voice cut through the tactical frequency. "I'm looking at 3 dead soldiers and 2 more who won't survive much longer without medical attention. We need to do something now, I know." Pierce screamed back, his composure finally cracking under the weight of command responsibility. "I'm trying to find a solution that doesn't get more people killed." Rachel closed her eyes and felt for Master Sergeant Dalton's bullet in her breast pocket. The specially marked round was warm against her fingers, carrying with it the weight of promise and possibility. "Only fire this when you're absolutely certain it will save a life," Dalton had told her. When everything else has failed and this is the only option left, everything else had failed. Pierce's conventional tactics had walked Charlie Company into a carefully prepared trap, and his refusal to consider alternatives was ensuring that more soldiers would die. General Blackstone would be executed or moved to a more secure location, and the rescue mission would end in complete failure. Rachel loaded Dalton's special bullet into her rifle's chamber, feeling the precise way it seated against the bolt face. She adjusted her scope for range and environmental conditions, using calculations that had become second nature during her academy training. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that every sniper learned, each exhalation bringing her closer to the natural respiratory pause where the human body achieves perfect stillness. Through her earpiece, she could hear the battle continuing. To rage below. More casualties, more desperate transmissions, more evidence that conventional solutions were inadequate for the tactical reality facing Charlie Company. Charlie 6, this is Overwatch. Colonel Frost's voice carried a note of grim finality. Higher headquarters is considering terminating the rescue mission. The casualty count is becoming unacceptable, and we can't risk losing an entire company for 3 hostages. Negative. Pierce replied immediately. We don't leave our people behind. Give me more time to find a solution. But time was running out. Rachel could see movement around the hostage compound. Enemy soldiers preparing to either execute their prisoners or move them to a more secure location. In minutes or perhaps seconds, General Blackstone would be beyond rescue, and Charlie Company's sacrifice would have accomplished nothing. Rachel keyed her radio transmitter, speaking for the first time since leaving the communications vehicle. Her voice was calm and professional, carrying none of the uncertainty that had plagued her 3 years earlier. Charlie 6, this is Overwatch, she transmitted, using the call sign typically reserved for sniper support. I have eyes on primary. Target, request permission to engage. The tactical frequency fell silent for several seconds, filled only with the distant sound of gunfire and the whisper of desert wind across the canyon rim. Then Pierce's voice came back, tight with disbelief and barely controlled rage. Who is this? Identify yourself immediately. Rachel adjusted her scope one final time, placing the crosshairs precisely on the enemy sniper's position. Her hands were steady as granite, her breathing controlled, her mind focused with laser-like intensity on the shot that would determine whether her fellow soldiers lived or died. This is Montgomery, she replied simply, and I'm taking the shot. Time seemed to slow as Rachel settled into her firing position, every sense heightened to superhuman clarity. The desert wind carried the scent of cordite and dust, the distant sounds of battle creating a deadly symphony that had become the soundtrack to Charlie Company's desperate struggle for survival. Through her rifle scope, the enemy sniper's position crystallized with perfect definition. 800 meters of empty air separating her from the shot that would determine whether her fellow soldiers lived or died. Montgomery, stand down immediately. Staff Sergeant Pierce's voice exploded through the tactical frequency, panic and rage fighting for dominance in his tone. You are not authorized to engage. Return to your assigned position. But Rachel had moved beyond the reach of Pierce's authority, beyond the limitations that had defined her military existence for 3 years. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, applying no pressure yet, waiting for the perfect confluence of conditions that would turn Dalton's special bullet into an instrument of salvation. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 1-1, Corporal Rivers transmitted, his voice tight with desperate hope. Let her take the shot. We're all going to die down here if something doesn't change. I will not have soldiers' lives endangered by someone who couldn't handle the pressure at sniper school. Pierce screamed back. Montgomery, I am giving you a direct order to stand down. Rachel's breathing had settled into the controlled rhythm that every elite marksman learned, each exhalation bringing her closer to the natural respiratory pause, where the human body achieved perfect stillness. The enemy sniper was visible through her scope, his profile partially concealed behind natural rock formation, but exposed enough for a precision shot. He was tracking Alpha Team's position, preparing to fire another round into the soldiers trapped. In the creek bed below, through her earpiece, she could hear the deteriorating situation as Pierce's refusal to accept help condemned more soldiers to death. "Contact! Contact!" Private Webb's voice cut through the frequency. "Snipers engaging again. Torres is hit." The tactical situation was collapsing by the minute. Charlie Company had been pinned down for over 30 minutes, with casualties mounting and no viable solution in sight. General Blackstone remained in enemy hands, and every second of delay increased the likelihood that he would be executed or moved beyond rescue. Rachel adjusted her scope for the final time, accounting for wind speed, elevation difference, and the slight thermal distortion created by the morning sun heating the canyon walls. At 800 meters, Master Sergeant Dalton's bullet would travel for approximately 1.1 seconds before reaching its target. During that time, the Earth would rotate slightly. The wind would shift the projectile's path by inches, and a dozen environmental factors would conspire to turn a perfect shot into a near miss. But she had trained for this moment through countless hours of instruction at ESCS, through 3 years of midnight practice sessions behind the equipment shed, through every theoretical exercise and practical application that had made her one of the most promising sniper candidates in Academy history. Her hands were absolutely steady, her mind focused with laser-like intensity, her body positioned for optimal stability and recoil management. "All stations, this is Overwatch." Colonel Frost's voice cut through the tactical frequency from base. "Command, Higher Headquarters has authorized termination of rescue mission. Begin immediate withdrawal from contact area." "Negative," Pierce transmitted immediately. "We don't abandon our people." "I need more time to." His words were cut off by the sharp crack of a high-powered rifle as the enemy sniper fired again. Through the radio, Rachel could hear the distinctive sound of a bullet striking body armor, followed by agonized screaming that could only mean another casualty. That was the moment she squeezed the trigger. The M24's report echoed across Devils Canyon like thunder, the sound reverberating off the rock walls and mixing with the ongoing battle below. Rachel felt the familiar push of recoil against her shoulder, the smooth cycling of the bolt as the rifle ejected the spent cartridge and prepared for a follow-up shot that wouldn't be necessary. Through her scope, she watched Master Sergeant Dalton's bullet travel its predetermined path with mathematical precision. 800 meters of desert air, crosswinds and thermal distortions, elevation changes and environmental variables, all of them calculated and compensated for in the 1.1 seconds it took for the projectile to reach its target. The bullet struck the enemy sniper center mass, exactly where Rachel had aimed. The impact was instantaneous and final, eliminating the primary threat that had been systematically destroying Charlie Company's assault. The shooter's rifle tumbled from his position, clattering down the rocky slope as his body went limp behind. The natural fortification. For several seconds, the tactical frequency fell completely silent. The ongoing gunfire from other enemy positions continued, but the deadly precision shots that had been picking off individual soldiers suddenly stopped. Alpha Team was no longer pinned down by the expert marksman who had been controlling their sector of the battlefield. "Jesus Christ," Corporal Rivers whispered into his radio. "The primary sniper is down. I repeat, the primary sniper is down. We've got movement capability in the creek bed." Rachel was already adjusting her scope to engage the secondary sniper position, 600 meters to the northwest. The second shooter was reacting to his partner's elimination, trying to relocate his position while maintaining fire on Bravo Team. But movement made him visible, and visibility made him vulnerable. Her second shot was fired 12 seconds after the first, Another perfect example of precision marksmanship under combat conditions. The 6.5mm projectile traveled its calculated path through the morning air, striking the second enemy sniper as he attempted to bound to a new firing position. He dropped immediately, his weapon falling silent as Charlie Company gained another measure of tactical freedom. 2 down. Rivers transmitted, excitement and disbelief mixing in his voice. Both primary sniper positions are neutralized. We can move, but Rachel's work wasn't finished. Through her scope, she could see the third enemy position on the canyon's western rim, nearly 1,000 meters away, and partially concealed by natural terrain features. This was the longest shot, the most challenging engagement, requiring every ounce of skill and training she possessed. The range was at the extreme limit of her weapon's capability, and the angle of engagement created additional complications. For bullet trajectory, at 1,000 meters, environmental factors became exponentially more significant. Wind speed, air density, temperature variations, all of them would affect the bullet's path during its 1.4-second flight time. Rachel made her calculations with the speed and precision of someone who had spent years studying ballistics and trajectory science. She adjusted her scope elevation for the extreme range, compensated for the crosswind that was gusting unpredictably through the canyon, and accounted for the Coriolis effect that would deflect her bullet slightly due to the Earth's rotation. Through her earpiece, she could hear Charlie Company beginning to move, taking advantage of the freedom provided by her elimination of the primary threats. Alpha Team, bound forward by fire teams. Bravo Team, provide covering fire and prepare to assault the compound. But the third enemy sniper was still active, still dangerous, still capable of stopping the rescue before it could succeed. As Rachel watched through her scope, she saw him tracking the movement of American soldiers, preparing to engage targets that were now exposed during their advance toward the compound. This was the shot that would determine everything. Success would clear the way for Charlie Company to reach General Blackstone. Failure would leave a deadly threat in position to pick off soldiers during the most vulnerable phase of their assault. Rachel's breathing slowed to perfect stillness as she prepared to fire the most important shot of her military career. The crosshairs settled on her target with surgical precision, and her finger began the slow, steady pressure that would send another bullet across nearly 1,000 meters of hostile territory. The crack of her rifle echoed across Devil's Canyon. Once more, and Rachel Montgomery, the soldier who had been told her hands were too shaky for precision work, watched her third consecutive perfect shot eliminate the final threat standing between Charlie Company and mission success. Battlefield fell silent as the last enemy sniper tumbled from his position, his rifle clattering down the rocky slope. For the first time in over an hour, American soldiers could move across Devil's Canyon without fear of precision fire from elevated positions. All sniper positions neutralized, Rachel transmitted calmly. Charlie Company has freedom of movement to complete rescue operation. The tactical frequency erupted with controlled chaos as Charlie Company seized the opportunity Rachel had created. For the first time in over an hour, American soldiers could move across Devil's Canyon without the constant threat of precision fire from elevated positions. The transformation was immediate and dramatic, turning what had been a death trap into a viable assault corridor. Alpha Team, advance by bounds. Staff Sergeant Pierce commanded, his voice carrying a note of disbelief despite his attempt to maintain tactical composure. Bravo Team, provide overwatch and prepare to breach the compound. Through her rifle scope, Rachel watched her fellow soldiers emerge from the cover that had protected them from enemy fire. Private Mason, despite his shoulder wound, was helping to carry equipment forward. Corporal Rivers led Alpha Team with renewed confidence, moving through terrain that minutes earlier had been swept by deadly crossfire. The entire tactical dynamic had shifted in Charlie Company's favor. "This is Charlie 1-1, Rivers transmitted as his team reached the compound's outer perimeter. We've got visual on the main building. No movement visible, but there are definitely fortified positions around the structure. Rachel maintained her overwatch position, scanning for additional threats while monitoring the radio traffic that painted a picture of the developing rescue operation. Her 3 shots had eliminated the long-range threats, but the enemy forces holding General Blackstone still pose significant challenges at close range. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 2-2, Specialist Crews reported. We're in position to breach the eastern wall. Charges are set and ready for detonation. Hold position, Pierce responded. I want confirmation on hostage location before we blow any walls. The rescue operation proceeded with military efficiency, each phase executed according to protocols that had been drilled countless times during training exercises. But Rachel knew that none of it would have been possible without the precision, fire support that had cleared the overwatch positions. The enemy's defensive plan had been expertly conceived and professionally executed, until a single sniper had systematically dismantled their advantage. Breach! 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 The explosive charges detonated simultaneously, creating multiple entry points into the compound's main structure. Through her scope, Rachel could see Charlie Company soldiers flowing through the breaches with practiced coordination, their movements swift and decisive as they cleared room after room. Hostages located. Came the triumphant transmission. We've got General Blackstone and 3 staff members. All alive, all mobile, preparing for immediate extraction. The radio frequency filled with relief and excitement as the news spread through the tactical network. After hours of mounting casualties and tactical setbacks, Charlie Company had successfully located their primary objective. General Blackstone was alive, and the rescue mission that had seemed doomed to failure was suddenly approaching success. Outstanding work, Charlie 6. Colonel Frost's voice came through from base command. Medical teams are standing by for casualty evacuation. What's your status on enemy resistance? Minimal at this point, Pierce replied. The elimination of those sniper positions broke their defensive plan. We're encountering scattered resistance, but nothing we can't handle. As Charlie Company began their extraction from the compound, Rachel started breaking down her firing position. She had accomplished what she came to do. The sniper threat had been neutralized, the rescue mission was succeeding, and her fellow soldiers were returning home alive. But she knew that her unauthorized participation in the operation would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical success. The communications vehicle was exactly where she had left it, her official duty station that she had abandoned to participate in combat operations without authorization. Rachel climbed back into the armored truck and re-established her connection to the tactical network, resuming her assigned role as if nothing had happened. Communications, this is Overwatch. Colonel Frost's voice came through the radio. What's your status on that equipment malfunction? All systems operational, sir, Rachel replied professionally. Field repairs were successful. I maintained monitoring capability throughout the operation. It was another lie, of course, but it provided the official cover story that would allow her superiors to avoid addressing the uncomfortable reality of what had actually happened. A communication specialist had abandoned her assigned position, violated direct orders, and single-handedly changed the outcome of a critical rescue mission through the application of skills she was supposedly unqualified to possess. 20 minutes later, Charlie Company's vehicles appeared on the horizon, returning from Devil's Canyon with their rescued personnel and wounded soldiers. Rachel watched through her vehicle's periscope as the convoy approached the base, noting the mixture of relief and excitement evident in the soldiers' postures and movements. The medical teams were waiting as the vehicles pulled into the motor pool, immediately beginning treatment of the wounded while other personnel conducted post-mission debriefings. General Blackstone emerged from one of the armored trucks, his uniform dirty and torn but his bearing still dignified despite his ordeal. The sight of the rescued general brought cheers from the assembled base personnel, a moment of triumph in what had begun as a potential disaster. But Rachel remained in her communications vehicle, monitoring the tactical frequencies and maintaining her official role as a support specialist. She had no desire to be part of the celebration, no need for recognition or acknowledgement. The mission had succeeded, her fellow soldiers were alive, and General Blackstone was safe. That was enough. The first indication that her unauthorized actions wouldn't remain secret came 30 minutes after the convoy's return, when Corporal Rivers approached her vehicle. The experienced soldier's expression was serious, but not hostile, carrying the weight of someone who understood the implications of what had occurred. "Montgomery," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "About what, Corporal?" Rachel replied, though she already knew the answer. "About the fact that someone with exceptional sniper training saved our lives today. About 3 perfect shots under impossible conditions. About the fact that the official record is going to show a communications specialist who never left her assigned position." Rivers pulled out a small digital camera, its display showing a series of images that made Rachel's blood run cold. The photos clearly showed her in firing position on the eastern ridge, her rifle trained on the enemy positions, her distinctive uniform and equipment clearly visible despite the distance and terrain. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because Private Webb was filming the assault with his personal camera when your shot started landing," Rivers explained. "He caught the muzzle flashes from your position, and I had him zoom in to confirm what I suspected. These images show exactly what happened out there." Rachel stared at the photographic evidence of her unauthorized participation, understanding that her carefully constructed cover story was about to collapse. The official narrative that allowed everyone to avoid uncomfortable questions about her capabilities and the circumstances of her dismissal from sniper school would be replaced by undeniable proof of her actual abilities. "What are you going to do with those images?" she asked. Rivers' expression softened slightly. "That depends on you, Montgomery. We can submit them through official channels as evidence of heroic action under fire. Your performance today was textbook perfect. 3 shots, 3 kills, at ranges that would challenge any sniper in the military. You saved lives and completed a mission that was failing. Or," Rachel prompted, "or we can keep them unofficial for now, while you decide how you want to handle this. But either way, people are going to start asking questions. Pierce knows what happened, even if he doesn't want to admit it. Colonel Frost isn't stupid. He's going to figure out where those shots came from. And Master Sergeant Dalton is going to want to know why his most promising student was relegated to communications duty." Rachel felt the weight of decision pressing down on her like a physical force. For 3 years, she had accepted the limitations imposed by bureaucratic fear and institutional blindness. She had endured mockery, dismissiveness, and professional exile because challenging the system seemed more dangerous than accepting injustice. But today had changed everything. Today, she had proven beyond any possible doubt that her hands were steady when lives depended on precision. Today, she had demonstrated that her training, her skills, and her tactical judgment were exactly what Master Sergeant Dalton had recognized years earlier. "I need time to think," she said finally. Rivers nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. But remember something, you didn't just save Charlie Company today. You proved that the system made a mistake when it labeled you unfit for duty. Those shots weren't lucky or accidental. They were the work of someone who belongs exactly where the bureaucracy said she didn't." As Rivers walked away, leaving Rachel alone with the photographic evidence of her vindication, she touched the empty pocket where Master Sergeant Dalton's bullet had been. The special round had fulfilled its purpose, saving lives when everything else had failed. But its greater significance was just beginning to unfold. Within hours, those images would circulate through military networks around the world. The soldier who had been dismissed for having shaky hands would become the subject of intense scrutiny and professional debate. And Rachel Montgomery would face the most important decision of her military career, whether to remain in the shadows or step forward to reclaim the identity that had been stolen from her 3 years earlier. The knock on Rachel's barracks door came at 0630 hours, exactly 12 hours after Charlie Company's return from Devil's Canyon. She had spent the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling while processing the implications of Corporal Rivers' photographic evidence. Sleep had been impossible, her mind cycling through the potential consequences of stepping forward to claim responsibility for the shots that had saved the rescue mission. "Montgomery," came the voice from outside her door. "Colonel Frost wants to see you in his office, immediately." Rachel dressed quickly in her service uniform, ensuring every detail met regulation standards. If she was about to face official scrutiny for her unauthorized actions, she would do so with the same attention to precision that had characterized her shooting. The walk to base headquarters felt longer than usual, each step carrying her closer to a reckoning that would determine the direction of her military career. Colonel Frost's office was larger than she had expected, decorated with military memorabilia and photographs from his 30-year career. The base commander sat behind his desk reviewing a stack of documents, his weathered face unreadable as Rachel reported for duty. Standing beside his desk was a figure she hadn't seen in 3 years, but would recognize anywhere: Master Sergeant Dalton looked older, grayer, but his sharp eyes still held the intelligence that had made him legendary among sniper instructors. "Specialist Montgomery reporting as ordered, sir," Rachel said, maintaining perfect military bearing, despite the emotional impact of seeing her former instructor. "At ease," Colonel Frost replied, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk. "We need to discuss what happened yesterday in Devil's Canyon. More specifically, we need to discuss how 3 enemy snipers were eliminated by shots fired from positions that weren't supposed to have any friendly personnel." Rachel remained silent, understanding that anything she said at this point would be carefully documented and potentially used in whatever proceedings might follow. The photographic evidence had obviously reached the command level, and her carefully constructed cover story was about to be thoroughly examined. Master Sergeant Dalton stepped forward, his expression mixing professional interest with personal concern. "Montgomery, I drove 18 hours to get here after seeing some very interesting footage that's been circulating through sniper communities worldwide. Video analysis shows 3 shots fired at ranges between 600 and 1,000 meters, each one hitting its target with surgical precision under combat conditions." Colonel Frost opened one of the folders on his desk, revealing high-resolution photographs that clearly showed Rachel in firing position on the eastern ridge. These images were taken by Private Webb during the rescue operation. They show a communications specialist who is supposed to be monitoring radio frequencies, not engaging enemy targets at extreme range. The evidence was undeniable, Rachel realized. Any attempt to maintain her cover story would only compound the situation by adding dishonesty to the charges of disobeying direct orders and abandoning her assigned position. She had made her choice the moment she picked up her rifle. Now she had to live with the consequences. "Sir, I can explain my actions," she said finally. "I certainly hope so," Colonel Frost replied. "Because what I'm looking at suggests that either you violated direct orders and engaged in unauthorized combat operations, or we've been wasting the talents of someone who might be one of the most capable snipers in the military." Master Sergeant Dalton pulled out a tablet computer, its screen showing ballistic analysis data that made Rachel's stomach tighten with anticipation. "The footage has been analyzed by some of the best marksmen in the world," he explained. "Shot placement, timing, environmental compensation, everything indicates someone with exceptional training executing perfect techniques under extreme pressure. The first shot was fired at 800 meters in crosswind conditions," Colonel Frost read from his notes. Bullet placement was center mass, instant incapacitation of target. The second shot engaged a moving target at 600 meters. Again with perfect accuracy. The third shot covered nearly 1,000 meters of terrain, striking a target that was partially concealed behind natural cover. Rachel felt a surge of professional pride despite the gravity of her situation. Those had been difficult shots, requiring every ounce of skill and training she possessed. To hear them described with technical precision by officers who understood marksmanship was validation of abilities that had been dismissed for 3 years. "Sir," she said carefully, "I observed Charlie Company taking heavy casualties from enemy sniper positions. My analysis of the tactical situation indicated that conventional approaches would result in mission failure and additional American deaths. I made the decision to neutralize those threats using whatever capabilities I possessed. Capabilities that your official record indicates you don't possess," Colonel Frost pointed out. "According to your file, you were medically disqualified from sniper training due to stress-induced motor instability. Yet yesterday's performance suggests someone with exceptional stability under the most extreme combat conditions." Master Sergeant Dalton stepped forward again, his expression serious but supportive. "Colonel, I've reviewed the circumstances of Montgomery's dismissal from ESCS. The incident that led to her disqualification was a training accident involving an improperly timed explosive charge. Her motor instability was actually a normal physiological response to mild concussion." "You're saying the medical board made an error?" Colonel Frost asked. "I'm saying the medical board made a decision based on incomplete information and bureaucratic fear," Dalton replied firmly. "Montgomery's overall performance at the academy was exceptional. Her tactical knowledge, marksmanship scores, and psychological evaluations all indicated someone who belonged in the sniper community." Colonel Frost leaned back in his chair, studying Rachel with the calculating gaze of an experienced commander weighing difficult decisions. "Montgomery, you disobeyed direct orders from your squad leader. You abandoned your assigned position during a combat operation. You engaged enemy targets without authorization. Any one of those actions could result in court-martial proceedings." Rachel felt her career hanging in the balance, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether she faced punishment or recognition for her actions. "Sir, I accept full responsibility for my decisions. I believe that my capabilities could make a difference in a tactical situation that was deteriorating rapidly." "And you were right," Colonel Frost said simply. "Charlie Company's after-action report indicates that your precision fire support was the decisive factor in mission success. Without the elimination of those sniper positions, the rescue would have failed and we would have lost additional personnel." The silence stretched for several seconds as Rachel processed the implications of the colonel's statement. This wasn't feeling like the prelude to disciplinary action. It was beginning to sound like something else entirely. Master Sergeant Dalton broke the silence, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades evaluating military talent. "Colonel, I'd like to request permission to conduct a full review of Montgomery's case. New psychological evaluation, updated marksmanship assessment, complete analysis of the circumstances surrounding her original dismissal." "What are you suggesting, Sergeant Major?" "I'm suggesting that we have a soldier who was incorrectly classified due to bureaucratic error. Someone whose actual capabilities far exceed her current assignment. Yesterday's performance proves that Montgomery belongs in the sniper community, not monitoring radio frequencies." Colonel Frost turned his attention back to Rachel, his expression thoughtful. "Montgomery, if we were to reopen your case, if we were to consider reassignment to duties more appropriate to your demonstrated abilities, would you be interested?" For 3 years, Rachel had dreamed of this moment, the opportunity to reclaim the identity that had been stolen from her by institutional blindness and bureaucratic fear. But now that it was being offered, she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what it would mean. "Sir," she said carefully, "I would be honored to serve in whatever capacity best utilizes my abilities to support military operations and protect American lives." "Outstanding," Colonel Frost replied with a slight smile, "because I just received a call from the Pentagon. Certain people in Washington have seen the footage from yesterday's operation, and they're very interested in meeting the soldier who made those shots." Master Sergeant Dalton's smile was broader, carrying the satisfaction of someone who had fought for 3 years to correct an injustice. "Montgomery, how would you feel about returning to Elite Sniper Command School? Not as a student this time, but as an instructor candidate specializing in precision fire under extreme conditions?" Rachel felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, understanding that her nightmare was finally ending and her real career was about to begin. The steady hands that everyone had claimed were too shaky for precision work would soon be training the next generation of military snipers. "I would be honored, Sergeant Major," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotional tsunami crashing through her consciousness. Outside Colonel Frost's office, the morning sun was rising over Forward Operating Base Ironclad, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Rachel Montgomery's military service. The soldier who had been written off as a failure was about to become living proof that potential should never be dismissed due to bureaucratic convenience or institutional fear. 6 months later, Rachel stood at the front of Classroom Alpha at Elite Sniper Command School, watching 24 of the military's most promising marksmen hang on her every word. The same academy that had dismissed her for alleged motor instability now bore her name on the Advanced Marksmanship Building, the Montgomery Precision Training Center, dedicated to developing snipers who could perform under the most extreme combat conditions. "The difference between a good shot and a great shot," she told her students, echoing words Master Sergeant Dalton had spoken years earlier, "isn't what happens on a perfect day at the range. It's what happens when everything is going wrong. When lives depend on your ability to make an impossible shot under impossible conditions." The classroom was silent, 24 pairs of eyes focused with laser-like intensity on the instructor, whose performance in Devil's Canyon had become required study material throughout the military's sniper community. Rachel's 3 shots had been analyzed, dissected, and studied by marksmen around the world, becoming textbook examples of precision fire support under combat conditions. "Who can tell me the most significant factor in long-range precision shooting?" Rachel asked, her gaze moving across the assembled students. A young corporal in the front row raised his hand. "Environmental compensation, ma'am. Wind, temperature, altitude, all the factors that affect bullet trajectory over extended range." "Good answer," Rachel acknowledged, "but incorrect. Anyone else?" "Mental discipline," suggested a staff sergeant from the back of the room. "The ability to control your thoughts and emotions under pressure." "Closer, but still not the answer I'm looking for." A female private near the window raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, is it confidence? Believing in your ability to make the shot even when everyone else has given up." Rachel smiled, recognizing something of her younger self in the private's uncertain expression. "That's part of it, but there's something more fundamental. The most significant factor in long-range precision shooting is the willingness to take responsibility for the consequences of your shot." She walked to the whiteboard, writing 3 numbers in precise military script: 800, 600, 1000. "These represent the ranges of the 3 shots I fired in Devil's Canyon. But the numbers themselves aren't what made those shots significant. What mattered was my understanding that missing meant watching my fellow soldiers die." The students absorbed this lesson with the seriousness it deserved, understanding that they weren't just learning technical skills, but accepting the moral weight that came with precision marksmanship. Rachel had restructured the entire ESCS curriculum around this principle, that snipers weren't just shooters, but soldiers who carried the responsibility for life and death decisions in their steady hands. After class, Rachel walked across the academy grounds to her office in the administrative building. The walls were decorated with photographs from her students' deployments, each image representing lives saved through the application of techniques learned in her classroom. But the centerpiece of her office was a simple display case containing a single bullet. Master Sergeant Dalton's special round, returned to her after serving as evidence in the investigation that had cleared her name. A knock on her door interrupted her review of training schedules for the following week. "Come in," she called, looking up to see a familiar figure in the doorway. Private Webb, now Corporal Webb, stood at attention, his expression mixing nervousness with determination. He had been one of Rachel's first students after her return to ESCS, and his progress had been remarkable. But more importantly, he represented the kind of soldier the new training protocols were designed to develop. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you before I ship out to my new assignment," Webb said. "The techniques you taught me about precision shooting. Under stress, they're going to make a real difference." "Where are they sending you, Corporal?" Rachel asked. "Afghanistan, ma'am. Forward Observer Team with the 82nd Airborne. I'll be providing overwatch for infantry operations in mountain terrain." Rachel felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with concern. Webb was well-trained, competent, and mentally prepared for the challenges he would face. But sending students into combat never became easier, no matter how confident she was in their abilities. "Remember what we discussed about patience," she told him. "The shot you don't take is often more important than the shot you do take. Your job isn't to accumulate a body count, it's to protect American lives through the precise application of lethal force when no other option exists." Webb nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am. I understand the responsibility." After he left, Rachel turned her attention to the stack of applications on her desk. Soldiers requesting admission to ESCS from units around the world. The Academy's reputation had grown exponentially since her return, attracting candidates who understood that sniper training had evolved beyond simple marksmanship into something approaching military art. But it was the final document in the stack that captured her attention. A psychological evaluation report for a young soldier who had been injured during training exercises, showing temporary hand tremors following a concussion. The medical board was recommending dismissal from sniper training, citing concerns about motor stability under stress. Rachel read the report twice, recognizing the bureaucratic language that had once destroyed her own career. The soldier in question, Specialist Jennifer Kane, had exceptional scores in every area except the single incident that had triggered the medical review. Her marksmanship was outstanding, her tactical knowledge impressive, her psychological profile showed remarkable resilience. The phone call to the medical review board took 20 minutes, but Rachel's reputation as the instructor who had revolutionized sniper training carried significant weight. She explained the circumstances of her own dismissal and eventual vindication, emphasizing the importance of distinguishing between temporary physiological responses and actual capability limitations. "Doctor, what you're seeing in Specialist Kane's evaluation is identical to what happened in my case 3 years ago," Rachel explained. "A training accident resulted in temporary symptoms that were misinterpreted as permanent limitations. I respectfully request that you reconsider your recommendation based on her overall performance rather than a single incident." The medical board agreed to review Kane's case, with Rachel serving as an expert witness regarding the circumstances and implications of training-related injuries. It was exactly the kind of institutional change she had hoped to achieve, ensuring that future soldiers wouldn't face the bureaucratic blindness that had nearly ended her career. That evening, Rachel walked across the academy grounds to the memorial wall where the names of ESCS graduates killed in action were engraved in black granite. Among them were soldiers she had known during her original training, friends who had given their lives in service to their country. But there were also names that had been added since her return, students she had trained, young men and women who had carried her lessons into combat and used them to protect American lives. Master Sergeant Dalton found her there, as he often did during the evening hours when the academy was quiet and the weight of responsibility felt heaviest. At 62, he was approaching mandatory retirement, but his dedication to developing elite marksmen remained as strong as ever. "Thinking about Kane's case?" he asked, joining her beside the memorial wall. "Among other things," Rachel replied. "It's strange how history repeats itself. The same bureaucratic thinking that nearly destroyed my career is still affecting good soldiers who deserve better. But now we have someone in position to fight those decisions," Dalton pointed out. "Someone who understands the difference between temporary setbacks and permanent limitations. Your experience gives you credibility that can't be ignored." Rachel touched the memorial wall, feeling the engraved names under her fingertips. "Do you think we're making a difference, Sergeant Major? Are we actually changing the system or just treating symptoms?" "Look around you," Dalton said, gesturing toward the academy buildings. "Training protocols have been rewritten based on your recommendations. Psychological evaluations now account for different types of stress responses. Medical boards are required to consider overall performance rather than isolated incidents. The Montgomery Precision Training Center isn't just a building. It's a symbol that potential should never be dismissed due to bureaucratic convenience." As they walked back toward the administrative building, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her from the communications trailer at Forward Operating Base, ironclad, to the instructor's podium at ESCS. The steady hands that everyone had claimed were too shaky for precision work were now shaping the next generation of military snipers, ensuring that future soldiers would have the training and support necessary to protect American lives in combat. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, and new opportunities to prove that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. But tonight, Rachel Montgomery could rest in the knowledge that her legacy would live on in every shot fired by soldiers who understood that precision was not just about hitting targets. It was about accepting responsibility for the consequences of both action and inaction. 2 years after her return to Elite Sniper Command School, Rachel Montgomery stood in the same classroom where Master Sergeant Dalton had once dismissed her dreams with a bureaucratic stamp. The irony wasn't lost on her as she prepared to address a new class of sniper candidates, knowing that among them sat the kinds of soldiers who might have been overlooked or dismissed by the old system. The door opened, and a young woman entered hesitantly, her movements slightly awkward due to a barely perceptible tremor in her left hand. Specialist Jennifer Kane had fought her medical dismissal for 6 months, with Rachel serving as her advocate through every appeal and review. The bureaucratic battle had been fierce, but Kane's overall performance record and Rachel's expert testimony had finally convinced the review board that temporary physiological responses shouldn't define a soldier's entire career. "Take a seat anywhere you're comfortable," Rachel told the assembled candidates. "Today we're going to discuss something that doesn't appear in any technical manual: the difference between mechanical precision and purposeful precision." Kane chose a seat in the middle of the classroom, her expression mixing nervous anticipation with fierce determination. Rachel recognized that look from her own mirror 3 years earlier, the face of someone who had been told they weren't good enough but refused to accept that verdict as final. "Who can tell me what happened in Devil's Canyon 18 months ago?" Rachel asked the class. A young sergeant raised his hand. "Ma'am, that's where you eliminated 3 enemy sniper positions during the rescue of General Blackstone. It's become required study material for long-range precision techniques." "Correct," Rachel acknowledged. "But what the official reports don't mention is that I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a rifle that day. According to my personnel file, I was medically unfit for sniper operations due to stress-induced motor instability." The classroom fell silent, 28 pairs of eyes focused with laser-like intensity on their instructor. This wasn't the sanitized version of events they had read in tactical manuals. This was the personal truth behind the legend. I had been relegated to communications duty because a medical board decided that my hands were too shaky for precision work. Rachel continued. For 3 years, I monitored radio frequencies while soldiers with supposedly steadier hands carried out the missions I had trained for. Kane shifted in her seat, understanding that this story had direct relevance to her own situation. Around the classroom, other students began to grasp that their instructor's legendary performance had emerged from circumstances that could apply to any of them. But on that day in Devil's Canyon, when Charlie Company was pinned down and dying, I faced a choice that every sniper will eventually confront. I could follow orders and watch good soldiers die, or I could trust in my training and take responsibility for the outcome. Rachel walked to the whiteboard, writing 3 words in precise military script. Patience, precision, purpose. These are the foundations of everything we do here. But they mean nothing without the 4th element, courage. The courage to act when action is required, regardless of what others believe about your capabilities. Ma'am, a corporal in the back row asked, how did you know your hands would be steady when it mattered? After 3 years of being told you couldn't handle the pressure? Because I never stopped practicing, Rachel replied simply. Every night, behind the equipment shed at Forward Operating Base Ironclad, I worked through the fundamentals that Master Sergeant Dalton had taught me. Breathing control, sight alignment, trigger discipline. My hands were never shaky. They were steady as granite when lives depended on precision. The lesson continued for another hour, covering advanced ballistics calculation and environmental compensation techniques. But the real education was happening on a deeper level, as students absorbed the understanding that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. After class, Kane approached Rachel's desk with obvious nervousness. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for fighting the medical board's decision. Without your advocacy, I would be monitoring communications equipment instead of learning precision marksmanship. Don't thank me yet, Rachel replied with a slight smile. Thank me when you graduate and start protecting American lives with the skills you learn here. That's when the real test begins. Kane nodded seriously. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? When you were facing dismissal from sniper training, did you ever doubt that you would get another chance? Rachel considered the question carefully, remembering the despair and frustration that had characterized her years in communications. Every day, she admitted. But doubt doesn't have to mean surrender. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight inside ourselves, convincing our hearts that our dreams are worth preserving even when the world says otherwise. That evening, Rachel walked across the academy grounds to the memorial wall where she had often met with Master Sergeant Dalton. But tonight, she wasn't alone. Kane had asked permission to join her, understanding that this ritual represented something important about the responsibility that came with sniper training. These names represent the ultimate purpose of everything. We teach here, Rachel explained, running her fingers across the engraved granite. Every technique, every lesson, every hour of practice serves one goal: ensuring that American soldiers come home alive. Kane studied the memorial wall with the solemnity of someone beginning to understand the weight of the profession she was entering. Ma'am, how do you handle the pressure of knowing that your students will carry your lessons into combat? By making sure those lessons are worth carrying, Rachel replied. By teaching not just how to shoot, but when to shoot and when not to shoot. By ensuring that every soldier who graduates from this academy understands that precision without purpose is just sophisticated target practice. As they stood in comfortable silence, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The communications specialist who had been dismissed as unfit for combat duty was now developing the next generation of military snipers, ensuring that future soldiers would have both the technical skills and moral foundation necessary to succeed in the most challenging circumstances. Kane, she said finally, I want you to have something." Rachel reached into her pocket and pulled out a single bullet, identical to the one Master Sergeant Dalton had given her years earlier. The brass casing gleamed in the evening light, carrying with it the weight of tradition and the promise of potential fulfilled. "This is special," Rachel explained, pressing the bullet into Kane's palm. "Only fire it when you're absolutely certain it will save a life. When everything else has failed and this is the only option left." Kane stared at the bullet with reverence, understanding that she was receiving more than ammunition. She was inheriting a legacy of excellence that had emerged from adversity and been tempered by experience. "Ma'am, I don't know if I'll ever be worthy of this responsibility." "Neither did I," Rachel replied. "But worthiness isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn through dedication, training, and the willingness to act when action is required. The soldier who saves lives isn't necessarily the one with the steadiest hands or the perfect record. It's the one who refuses to quit when everyone else has given up hope." As they walked back toward the barracks, Kane clutching the special bullet, like a sacred relic, Rachel felt the satisfaction that came with knowing her story had become more than personal vindication. It had become a foundation for systematic change, ensuring that future soldiers wouldn't face the bureaucratic blindness that had nearly ended her career. The steady hands that had been labeled too shaky for precision work were now guiding other hands toward the same level of excellence. And somewhere in the future, when those students faced their own moments of truth, they would remember the lessons learned from an instructor who had proven that failure was never final for those who refused to accept defeat. The girl who couldn't handle a rifle when it counted had become the woman who ensured that others would never doubt their own capabilities when lives hung in the balance. And that, Rachel knew, was a legacy worth building one shot at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.